to this episode of Electronic Cafe. Mark and I have just had a fantastic chat, haven't we, mate, with the brilliant Finlay Shakespeare and his awesome new album that's coming out on the 14th of June. Absolute delight.
I mean, it's great. I mean, talk to Finlay. I mean, Finlay's a solo artist on his own. He was part of the remainder with New Arthur, and is also, just such a great electronic synth wizard guy, knows his stuff, and a great pedigree of electronic music. It's just really interesting to speak to him.
Yeah, well, love his previous work and can't wait to hear this new album. I know you'll be able to put some tracks in between the interview time this goes out, mate. But yeah, really can't wait to hear it. And yeah, this guy just deserves to be, like most of the artists we meet that, aren't the big names, a massive success because he's a genuinely talented artist.
Yeah, exactly. So let's dive in. Let people hear Finlay Shakespeare and his music and enjoy.
It's because he heard a Finlay Shakespeare album.
Bullshit.
Welcome to the Electronic Cafe. Today we have one of our favourite synth wizard artists on the Electronic Cafe. He's been on before as part of the remainder, but we're here to talk about his new forthcoming album, and we love this guy, Finlay Shakespeare. Welcome to the Electronic Cafe, my friend. Lovely to have you.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much.
That's brilliant. Mate, Directions Out of Town, the new album, out on June the 14th.
Yeah,
we're super excited to hear it. What can the listeners or our viewers expect to hear from you on this?
I think something a bit different. It's kind of my least dancey album so far. Yeah, it's quite I kind of took quite a turn with it in terms of the making of it, and tried to genuinely avoid any kind of easy processes, I guess, that I would have done on the last few albums. I don't know. It is quite different. There's not many drums on it. There's all the synths on it. I tried to make this conscious decision for anything not to sound like a real instrument, if that makes any sense.
No, got you.
Bass lines don't necessarily reflect, I don't know, how a bass guitar might sound. There are bits of this stuff, but no kind of synth brass or synth strings. There's none of that. And where that was needed, where I thought I'd really like a hi-hat part here, for example. I'd go and actually record a proper kit. So there's maybe a bit more kind of, acoustic drums on there. There's quite a lot of electric guitar in there, but it's, masked up with other things. And
nice.
It's quite different. But also in terms of a lot of the sonics on the album, there are, very rough field recordings on there. There are things where I've taken impulse responses of rooms, again, really rough. So just clapping in an old Roman, ruin or whatever, recording that on the phone and then saying, okay, well, that's going to be the reverb on this track or whatever, kind of pulling that impulse response apart so the reverb starts changing. That was another thing on this album that that whole, I guess, lack of emulation, trying to avoid anything or simulation, trying to avoid that even applied to the mix down. So it's where there is reverb, I'm using the reverb in quite a wild way. It's not, I say wild, it's not necessarily anything new. Plenty of people have done it before, but it's, whereas on other albums, it might have been put it through some reverb, that gives it a sense of space. This is more I'm going to put it in there, but the reverb is going to sound like an artificial reverb, and I'm going to modulate that, pull it apart, So the kind of like virtual room that you get from that is just being contorted and stretched and compressed all the time. So it's quite an odd one. It's
obviously, I know we saw you recently touring with Neil and Liam. But are you going to take this out on the road, or?
I'm not sure, to be honest. It's been a bit of a rough year, really,
Right.
and kind of again, it's weird revisiting the record. I mean, it's been finished for about a year.
Okay.
In revisiting this record, I mean, I've lost my kind of live agent because she needed to get what she called a proper job. I mean, I've been in exactly the same boat. I've got one show coming up, I think, in August at Kendal Calling. That's it for the foreseeable. And to be honest, I mean, I don't really know how sustainable any of that is. It's really hard work, even trying to get maybe half your tickets sold. And especially if you kind of like putting a risk down on or putting a bet down on something that's a bit risky, you're not necessarily going to even out financially. It's not really going to make a profit, and that's not the reason I've put on any shows. But obviously, if you are a professional promoter, you do need to make a living, and I think it's incredibly difficult. It happens. There's so much amazing music out there that just doesn't get represented. I think the thing that I find really frustrating is that there are promoters out there, and I've named them in the past, but I won't now, who present themselves as incredibly forward-thinking and incredibly progressive, and yet they are still booking acts that were popular 20 years ago. And that's fine. There's not a problem in booking those acts, but do not represent yourself as some kind of hero of independent culture, when the independent culture, truly independent culture, is really on its knees. I mean, it's kind of already dead, because there is no way of making this work financially anymore.
I mean, you touched on a few good points there, Finlay. I mean, me and Andy was in bands, 80s, 90s, 2000s, those sort of things, and we played all around London. 2/3 of those venues don't exist anymore. So if you're an up and coming independent artist and you want to get out there and play live, there's not the outlets there for most people to play live anyway.
No.
Secondly, we put on a couple of electronic cafe live events, which, touch wood, have been really successful. But we do know that the resources and time that, I mean, we're independent. It's just me and Andy. We're not in it.
Yeah.
We're not in it for the money. We're in it to try and introduce great new music to our subscriber base, to our audience and stuff. But, me and Andy worked on Electronic Cafe 2 probably for 9 months leading up to that one gig, just promoting it and just getting it out there and everything, because we really did pump it to get that sold out and to get that to be as success as it is.
It's quite peculiar. I mean, not to get all kind of like Europhile on it, but you look over in Europe and the amount of money that is used to fund the arts and culture from a state point of view is incredible. I mean, France, Germany, Sweden. You just think like, well, how come we don't have that? We have the Arts Council, but I mean, their funding is just getting absolutely decimated. I remember everyone, over COVID being like, well, you've got to respect arts and culture because it's the thing that's kind of keeping people, from in real dark places. And yet now, when we're potentially in an even darker place, because you can't really necessarily enjoy your own like home, you can't enjoy your domestic life because you're expected to work so much post-COVID. I don't know. I find it quite baffling how we've managed to find ourselves in this place. But you know,
I mean, sadly, I mean, the question of economics has just come crashing down over everything. I mean, you know, without getting too heavy on it, I mean, record labels don't exist in the same way they did even 30 years ago. I mean, they tend to be, you know, A&R departments are run by accountants now rather than the lovers of music. And, you know, artists were always given 3-4 albums maybe to grow before record companies made a decision, you know. I mean, I suppose you could look at an easy one to look at would be U2, that became a world famous band with the Joshua Tree, but it took them 4 albums to get to that point. Now, if U2 came out these days, would they be given that luxury of 4 albums to develop before they became the biggest band in the world? They probably wouldn't, because the A&R,
absolutely not.
The accounts people would just go, oh, the first album didn't really sell, we'll drop and move on. So you know, you haven't got that investment in independent artists, or you know, catching that lightning in a bottle is basically what it is. I mean, you know, you give these people the funding and the time to develop, and then you'll get what you're looking for.
On another note, mate, I noticed when we saw you at the gig, you're part of the Blancmange legacy there, which is fantastic. Knowing Neil like we do, you guys must be working on a new album.
I know Neil's busy. That means yes. You know, we work with Neil very much in a live capacity, and then the remainder is kind of like where all the studio stuff really happens. And I mean, the tour was an amazing opportunity for us three to actually kind of again be in the same place, you know, mixing that record. That was the first time we had all been in the same room together, at least working on music in that capacity. And that was it was kind of in that weird, are we post-COVID yet time, you know, where it was supposedly safe again, you know. So we all Neil and Liam came down to Bristol. We worked in my studio, which is sadly no more, yet another kind of economic victim. And it was just golden. And I think having, you know, the kind of in-person experience again on tour, we've kind of said, look, we need to get into this. And even just doing really stupid stuff. I mean, we went for a walk around Hadrian's Wall after doing Glasgow, found these amazing springs on like some of the, you know, self-closing gates and all that. I'm just like, oh yeah, take an impulse response to that. So like, you know, Liam's there with his phone and like I'm whacking the spring, and we've got this, you know, then in the van, you know, on over Bluetooth into the car stereo, like, you know, what happens if you put an 808 through it? Oh, it sounds amazing, you know. So we've already kind of started on this, like, I think vaguely how we want it to sound. I think the next Remainder album is going to be a lot, not heavier, but kind of a bit punchier and maybe a bit more techno. So I think it's going to be not a departure, but it's going to be quite a step. On whatever we do next.
You was always going to go that way, I think, Finlay, because I mean, we saw you solo supporting Neil a good few years ago now. I mean, you look like this mad scientist, techno wizard. I mean, there was like you, and it was like you was operating everything, and I think you had some modular stuff in front of you, and you was like manipulating stuff. And going back to the new album, was there a lot of modular stuff on there, or is there a lot of modular stuff on it, or is it more, you mentioned there's some traditional instruments as well, but regular synths, and modular, or mainly modular, or how does it pan out?
It's kind of a bit of a weird one. There isn't really like a clear dividing line for me where the whole modular thing begins. I mean, right. I've kind of reset the studio up in this little space here, and I always treat it, even having kind of individual synthesizers and effects units, I treat that as a patchable thing. So this is the thing. It's kind of like, well, you could say the studio is one device, right? And that all the constituent components of that studio are modules. And as long as you've got them going into a patch bay and you can route anything anywhere, that is a modular system. So I know on the new album there's a lot of I'm just looking around at me because I'm kind of surrounded by equipment that sadly you can't see, but there's bits of like Nord modular stuff on there, so digital modular, there's some software modular stuff, there's some analog modular, but then there's also a lot of just very I don't know, some of my favorite kind of synths on there. So there's a lot of Elasis Ion. It's kind of old virtual analog that I've had since my teens. When they discontinued it, they took the prices way down, and it was suddenly like, oh my god, I might actually be able to afford like a polyphonic synth. Wow, that isn't a microKORG and actually has full size keys and all that. It's really good. And people bang on about like, oh, it's got all these different filter models and all of that. Yeah, all right. But from what you can do with like FM on it as well, and doing weird sync things in with the FM, so you've got this kind of digital feedback thing and all the modulation. I mean, it's incredible. There's a lot of that on the record. MS-20, as always, picked up a DC-10, the Korg vocoder, maybe a couple of years back. There's a bit of that on there, but again, it's all kind of bedded in.
But I know exactly when this changed. I know my mind's made up now. I know exactly when I changed. And there's no return in time.
I think that was another thing, is just trying to really use equipment in the studio that I hadn't touched for a long time. So there's a lot of really cheap like DSP effects on there.
Two things. We spoke to Thomas Dolby a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about equipment. And I said to him, do you have much of your old equipment still? And he said no, he's got rid of it all, and he uses just software synths and everything. But he had a lot of old gear in storage, like his Jupiter 8 and all things like that, that he was kind of like known for, sort of back in the day. Cut long story short, he got smashed in, he lost his Jupiter 8, but Roland gave him one for a show, and he said his muscle memory and his hands, he hadn't played one for 20 years, went straight to it. He knew what knobs did what. He said where there's something tangible about having the hardware synth as opposed to scrolling through a spreadsheet on software stuff and just like sounds. I mean, it sounds like the kit that you've got. I mean, you got some old kit from back in the day. I mean, I had a lot of analog synths. I mean, I started with that SH101 Roland, Juno 6. I had a Korg Poly 800 as well for my sins. I've got a Yamaha now, and I use the Nord Lead 2X. Which I really like that synth. A lot of those old synths had a really kind of like dirty, kind of heavy sound. It sounds like by you buying the odd bit of kit has just made your choices infinite, really, like in the studio.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about palette. I always think of it as like an artist, a painter with a canvas and a palette, right? Yeah. I mean, if you have a limited set of colors, then you're going to paint with those limited set of colors, and that can be interesting. That can be really, really interesting. In electronic music, there's a lot of artists who say like, right, okay, I'm just going to make an album on. It's typically the Buchla Music Easel. It's always the Buchla Music Easel, and a lot of those albums I've got a lot of time for. I mean, I built like the Buchla synth out of the easel over lockdown from a kit. And lo and behold, it's like it just sounds like all those records. You know, it's like you can so easily get there. But the thing with having kind of like all of these disparate bits of gear is like, yeah, okay, some of the time you run into odd, I don't know, like standards problems, you know, the whole control voltage thing, if it's volt per octave versus hertz per volt, and also, you know, gates and all that. When you start getting everything talking to each other and it's actually working and you know, it's just a case of like, right, turn it on. I don't know whether I'm going to go into Ableton and sequence from there, send MIDI out to different places, or even just control the audio routing from there. You know, it suddenly says like, well, okay, you can send, you know, I don't know, this drum part through these effects pedals, this effects rack, this bit of modular, this spring reverb over there. And you just say, well, yeah, I want to do all of that at once. And then I want to just kind of sculpt it all, or I can patch things in to one another. So, you know, maybe the spring reverb goes back into the pedals and goes through, I don't know, a flanger or whatever. Like it's having that flexibility. And again, that is the kind of modular synth way of working. It's just having patchability. You know, I remember talking to Neil about this when he was saying like, well, I might get a patch bay. And I was like, no. You absolutely should get a patch bay, and you should get it up and running as soon as you can. It's a bit of a cliche, but I absolutely love the like 1981 Kraftwerk Kling Klang thing where they took all of that on tour, and you actually look at the ergonomics of that, and it's unbelievable. I mean, everything is in reach between the four of them. Like everything's mounted in 19-inch racks.
Yeah,
so you just wheel them on stage. That kind of thing is. That to me is kind of like the paragon, at least at that time, you know.
Yeah, God, yeah. On that, mate, just as a sort of final sort of question, who were your influences? I mean, I'm going to I might be putting my neck on the line here, but when I said to you earlier, me and Mark were saying when we was playing some of your stuff the other day and going through it, I can hear a John Foxx inspiration in that. But
yeah, massively.
Yeah.
So I mean, going from the start. The thing that hooked me as a kid, I used to go through my parents' CD collection. This is when I was like a toddler, almost like 2 or 3. Yeah. I used to pick albums out. I don't know if they had put them on and I had, you know, remembered the sleeve or something. And what I heard had stuck with me clearly. But there's a Jean-Michel Jarre compilation that went up to Zuluk, so you had all the kind of weird and stuff there, but you also had like bits from Oxygen and Equinox and Magnetic Fields and all that. That was it. I became obsessed with that, and I mean this was maybe when I was 3, I think, and I would reach for that. I would be like pointing at it. And my mum and dad eventually. Well, I'm not even sure if it was eventually. They taught me how to use the stereo. So they taught me how to use the CD player. And then I think when I could reach it, the record player. And they were of a time really that was kind of perfect for electronic music. They were in their late teens, kind of in the early 80s. So they had all the Human League, 12 inches. You know, they had Dare. My mum had a copy of Travelogue. My dad had all the Japan stuff. He was a massive Gary Newman fan. Metamatic, most importantly, John Foxx, loads of 7 inches. And it was just going through all of that and just becoming absolutely bewildered by these sounds. You know, I mean, as a kid, I think like electronic music's amazing because you're hearing things that they're not out in nature. There's one particular memory from that Jean-Michel Jarre best of, which is in the middle part of the first part of Magnetic Fields, where it all goes a bit kind of abstract. There's no sense of rhythm. and there's a lot of Fairlight stuff going on. And I remember as a kid hearing that and just being like, what is that? What is that? And kind of, you know, now I've grown up, it's like, oh yeah, okay, I get it now. But then lucky to be growing up when I was, because you had the whole kind of like, I mean, very commercial, but some quite amazing dance music coming out kind of at the end of the 90s. So Chemical Brothers. Still amazes me that Setting Sun was a #1, because the middle part of that may as well be something from JRM. Yeah. Like it's noise. It's essentially noise music, and yet that's at the #1 spot.
Remember the times we slept with younger guns, but I didn't know. How could I know back then that it could get so low? This is your fortune.
Then it's Warp Records. And then from Warp Records, it's kind of all the Detroit electro stuff. So Drexciya, Clarke, Perspex. Also magazines at the time. We're doing like a lot of kind of retrospective things. I've got an amazing copy of, I'm not sure if it's Q, but they did a special about Depeche Mode, but it's pretty much a potted history of new wave and post-punk electronic music from maybe 78 to 84. And that was amazing, because it was like, well, what is the normal? I know Mute Records because my mum's got Speak and Spell, but I don't, who is the Daniel Miller? Well, I've heard that name because I've seen him on production credits. Oh, well, who's Daniel Miller? And then, you know, reading all this stuff, it all just, I think, converged at a perfect time. And then, you know, obviously we're in the place where we are now, where everything's just immediately accessible, which is almost a bit of a shame because there's no mystery. But yeah, and just kind of, you know, opening my boundaries. I mean, even Editions may go, biased as I may be. I remember when I first heard, I think it was Florian Hecker. Hecker did an album on Buchla stuff again. And I absolutely did not understand it whatsoever. I was like vehemently like, I do not get this. What is it? But there was also the absolute cemented curiosity of like, I don't know what this is and I don't rate it, but there is something that keeps me coming back to it. And now I'm like, okay, I don't think that album is necessarily Hecker's best work, but there is something about it that it's like, this came from nowhere, and this is very strange. And then music libraries, CD and tape libraries. Our local one had a massive sale, and I walked out with a tape that just said electronic music on it. And I had no idea what this was. And it was John Cage, Luciano Berio, and Mimaroglu. Very much tape music, very abstract, very avant-garde. And I remember putting that on, I must have been like 8, on a Walkman, and just, you know, it's like, I am terrified, absolutely shocked as to what this is. And that was mind-blowing as well. And just, I mean, that is definitely a formative kind of album for me. But also walking away from that place with like Tamita, and I think I kept begging them to get Wendy Carlos records in, because again, I'd read the name and I'm like, well, what is this? What is it? And you could go to a record fair and you could finally find, you know, a Wendy Carlos Clockwork Orange soundtrack, get home, put that on. Whoa, what is this? You know, Beethoven's Ninth, and it's all vocoded, and how does it sound so real? And what the hell is, you know, all of that. There's so much in there. But yeah, I think I was really lucky in terms of my place in time.
I think you showed how old me and Andy are when you
was thinking that
you was flicking through your parents' CD collection.
Made me feel really old.
I know it gets tough, but I can't say this enough. I don't want to see this ending in tears.
given your palette, which is vast, what would be your desert island disc?
Oh, there's a question.
I think Travelogue Human League,
That's a great shout. That's a great
because
shout.
that record, I mean, since really, you know, finding it as a kid, you know, then it was like, wow, this sounds amazing. And then you start kind of getting into the depths of lyrically what Phil Oakey's really actually talking about. And, you know, that has another resonance. Memories, it's when I went and met Peter Rehberg in Vienna, kind of officially for the, you know, well, let's invite you into the Mago fold. We went up onto Vienna's kind of in a valley, it's surrounded by hills, and on one side of the hills, there's just loads of vineyards. And they open them up in summer. You can go drink wine, eat, you know, little cornichon and all that. And we all just got remarkably drunk and stumbled back to where he was living at the time. Got a load of pizzas from down. He was like kind of on the corner of the street, and like down on the corner of the street was a pizzeria. We brought these pizzas back up, put them down on the table, and completely unannounced, he just put Travelogue on, and that's going to stick with me forever now. I mean, that really is quite a defining memory of that album.
Wow.
So yeah, I think that's it.
Amazing, mate. It's a great shout. Great shout.
Oh, thanks.
I won't rat you out, you know, but all I can do is write you a note. I'm still traveling to open land. I'm still living on the one-time past.
Really good shout, mate. Honestly, can't wait to hear the album. And for all the people in Electronic Cafe, when Mark edits this, they'll get to hear it as well. And obviously, meeting a lovely guy that if they don't know you, that you are, but also hearing your amazing music. You know, we're big fans. We're
thank you,
behind you, and I really hope it's a massive success because you deserve it, mate.
Thank you.
Listen
Thank
to
you.
your stuff. We're big fans, so it's really, really cool. So
Thank you so much.
mate, always a joy, my friend. You're a top man. So thank you.
Well, thank you for inviting me on. It's always a pleasure. It's always a pleasure
Cool.
with you guys. So
Yeah, can't wait to hear it.
Thank you very much for speaking to us today.
thank you both of you. Yeah, absolutely a pleasure to talk to every time. So
We look forward to the album coming out because obviously we love your stuff. We love seeing you live, but we love what you do. You seem to come at electronic music from a totally different perspective to a lot of people, and the results are phenomenal. So
thank you.
looking forward to the new album, and we wish you all the best of luck, and hope this episode helps you a little bit.
No, thank you so much, guys.
Great
Yeah,
stuff, mate.
take it easy, yeah.
Speak
Cheers,
soon.
mate.
Take care, mate. Thanks
Have
a
a
lot.
good one.
Thank you.
Thank you, mate. Bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.